Book Your Way, the interview series that goes behind the scenes of real self-published books to explode the myth that there's one right way to write your book. I'm Kris Emery, your host, and I am a nonfiction editor and author of my own book, Destination Author. Today, I'm interviewing Tiffany Manchester, who is a 2 times author in new adult fiction. Her books, Pack Light and Surfacing, were written about 4 years apart, and I worked with her on both of them. And I'd like to explore her journey and the difference between the 2 books that she has written and her experience of those. Let's dive in. Hi everyone, so today we're here with Tiffany Manchester and I am going to dive straight in and ask you, Tiff, to introduce yourself and how your books relate to your business and what you're doing with your books at the moment, where you're at with them.
Okay, of course. Hi, Kris. I'm Tiffany. I'm an author living in Hawaii from Canada. And I wrote my first book as a side experiment to my business, which is coaching people, tapping into their intuition. And I did angel tarot readings. But I really, really enjoyed the process of having a book. But because I was busy with my angel readings and such, that I didn't feel like I was giving my book enough opportunity in terms of getting it out into the market. But I really appreciated that process. And then I had another book in me and I just kept having these ideas for books. So after I finished publishing my second book, I decided to transition into being an author full time because of the energy and commitment that it takes to write and publish a book. And then the sales and marketing of it is just such a huge adventure that I needed to give it the best possible chance because I want people to read and enjoy my books. So that's where I'm at right now, full-time author.
Amazing. So can you tell people watching or listening a little bit about the 2 books that you do have available, what they're about, what kind of genre you work in, and all that kind of thing, and how it came to be?
Sure. My first book is called Surfacing. I really like to write adventure books that have an aspect of spirituality to them so that the people who are reading them, my hope is that they automatically gain clarity and insight within their own life as they read the adventure of the protagonist. So there's a lot of sport in it. So the first one's about a professional surfer girl who connects with an angel, and this angel helps her tap into her intuition and guides her into understanding how to go with the flow and meditate and just experience life in a way that it's less struggle and more ease, especially as someone who's in their 20s. So I write like new adult fiction. So it's women in their 20s. It's like the post-college, not that they went to college, but it's that span in between where like you're in the real world and you're trying to navigate your life and what path you're on and how you want to carve your own path. And my second book is a fictionalized memoir about a kayaker, a whitewater kayaker woman who, again, is on these adventures around the world, finding courage, facing death in her crazy adventures, climbing mountains and 5-class rivers, and how she overcomes the obstacles in her mind, in her physical experiences, and in her heart with the many relationships she meets along the way.
Yeah, I love that. I really resonate with your books because I feel like we've had similar life paths in terms of finding our feet with a few different things, relationships with parents, um, all of those ambitious, that drive that you have when you're in that stage of life, and yet so many opportunities that you want to take them all, and how to navigate the best path, and the disappointments and heartbreaks and all that kind of thing. So I just love that your books are packed with all of those really relevant themes that come up at that kind of time of our life. So you touched, excuse me, I'm a bit croaky today. You touched really briefly on you loved the process and you're making it your whole career, really, your whole work at the moment. So why don't we talk about the process and what it takes for you to get started on a book, what it looks like when you're in the book, and then what it looks like to know that you're kind of done and when to hand it over. If you can just give us an overview of that.
Well, I'm still a new author, so I'm still finding my footing in terms of what works for me, because I know there's no like one right path for writers. Um, but the idea just comes to me first of all. So it's like this idea just is implanted into my brain. And I know when I can't stop thinking about it, that I have to write it. I know that that's something that needs to come out of me. Whether I want to publish it or not isn't something I worry about in the moment. It's like this creative project that has to, there's like a personal healing aspect that comes from writing.
Mm.
And I usually start from the beginning, and I'll write in the morning
Chronologically.
chronologically. Um, at the moment, I haven't like plotted too much. I tried doing that with the second book. I tried like plotting it all out, and because it was more of a memoir, I knew what specific stories I wanted to tell. Um, and that worked in some ways and not in every way, because it confused me, because it pulled me out of just going with the flow.
Mm.
Um, and so I think I like going, just starting from the beginning, having a general idea, and just enjoying the experience of receiving the information from my inner guidance system
Mm.
and working from that place initially to get that first draft out.
Yeah.
Then I'll go back for the second draft and really contemplate what's making sense and what's not, and expand on things or maybe shorten things. I'm still getting a clearer picture of how the story is unfolding. And then I'll do that two more times. So usually I'll do like four, so far in my two books, I do about four run throughs before I feel, I never know if it's complete enough for an editor, but I'll do it to the extent that I know it's the best that I can do. And so then I know it's time to pass it on. So
Mm.
I definitely don't get sloppy in terms of feeling like it's half finished. I finish it to the best of my ability, and then I give it to someone else who can help me finish it better.
That is so important, and it's something that doesn't come up enough, I think, in conversations like this, is how much self-editing really needs to be done before you're ready to edit. And I noticed a few of my clients sort of writing right up to the deadline, and I was getting essentially a first draft. And then there was this almost surprise that there was quite a lot of feedback in that edit. And I am very thorough in my feedback, and I will notice lots of tiny little details that it's my job to notice. And it's not that something is wrong or doesn't work, it's just I'm probing. And so obviously there's a lot more to probe when there's just a first draft than when you've already thought things through. And what I love about working with you is quite often I'll give you a piece of feedback and you almost always say, oh, I was thinking about that, or I was wondering about that. So you can tell that you've done a lot of work and a lot of contemplation and playing around with it to get it to a really good state before you're ready to hand it over. And I usually hear from you quite a good amount of time in advance, because you know roughly how long that is taking you. And you know in your mind like what your finished as far as possible version looks like. My little vocal cat has come to join us. We're fostering at the moment, and she's a little bit noisy in the background
I
there.
can't
So.
hear.
Oh, you can't? Okay.
No.
She might join us later and just
Oh,
hop up in
cool.
front of me. So if I so yeah, so let's talk about like what the in it kind of feeling is like. So where is it that you write? Are you always in the same spot every day? Do you have a very strict routine with yourself, or I know that you like to go with the flow in a lot of other senses in your life. So do you switch it up when you write, or what does it look like?
Well, I've moved a bunch of times during my writing of the two books, but I will always sit at a desk, whether it's the kitchen counter or my new office space that I've created. And my best times to write are first thing in the morning, because if I put that off, I will start getting distracted with everything else. And then it's unlikely that I'm going to like give myself the time and energy to like hone in, like zone in on the writing. So I try to do that before I do anything else on the computer. Yeah. And I'll do that for like I try to get in a couple of hours a day when I'm in my book writing mode. I'm not the kind of person right now anyway that who is like writing every day no matter what. I do notice though, because I've like half wrote my next book. I've had half written my third book, and I've put it on the side burner because I was publishing my next one. And I read somewhere from this guy, David Gaughran. He's this really great writer. And he says, if you stop the habit of writing, you'll easily pass 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, and you won't do it. And I'm like, yeah, he's totally right. Yeah. So I haven't been making the space for it. So it's really recommitting to that. I think just like any other practice, like your physical activity or meditation, I was out of practice and I've just started doing it again. And it's like, man, so easy to put off those things that are really good for us.
Yeah, I'm like that with exercise for sure. When I'm in a rhythm, it feels really easy. But once the momentum has slowed down to a stop, it's really hard to get that, boulder moving again.
Yeah.
And sometimes I set myself the goal of just getting to the gym rather than an exercise goal. It's like literally a go thing, because you never go to the gym and don't do anything. But sometimes that's just the only goal I can set. So as far as writing is concerned, sometimes it's really just, let's just open the document.
Totally.
Sometimes I have to do that even for editing. Like, let's just open the document and then it will be there facing me when I next sit down to the computer. So going in and finding where I've saved it, and even just that tiny little obstacle can prevent me from doing things. So
yeah, and just I don't put a limit on. I don't at this point. I haven't put goals on like a certain amount of words per session, but I definitely try not to do any editing. Like I may just need to revisit what I wrote just to get me back into the flow, but I don't want to spend that precious time not writing. So I don't worry about it, and I just get writing as much as I can for the 1 or 2 hours that I'm doing it.
Absolutely, because that's the part that nobody else can do for you, is getting it out. Once it's down on the page, you can tinker with it for as long as you like. You can play around with that forever. Your editor is going to go through it a few times as well. But the bit that can't come from anyone other than you is just getting it onto the page in the first place. So that's a writer's most important job anyway. So that's a really great approach. I'm horrendous at revisiting and editing, but like I think that is part of my process. Like, to go over what I've already written can sometimes spark, some ideas. Because like you, I don't plan really, really thoroughly. I have a sketch outline, a loose outline, which I recommend having like at least the chapters in place, but it depends what works for you. And obviously, you know your life inside out. So when you're writing memoir style, it's all in there.
Yeah.
So what are those other things that you spend your time doing as an author that aren't just writing books and writing books? I think it sometimes comes as a bit of a surprise to people that there is so much non-book writing related stuff to do as an author, but it's actually mostly that, right?
It's mostly that. That's why it's like 1 or 2 hours a day is writing, and the rest of it, well, aside from the rest of life stuff. As an indie publisher, it's been understanding how to self-publish, then all the questions that go along with Amazon or being wide, and there's a whole debate around that. What programs and software to use to help with formatting, book covers, blurbs, what genre you're in, your tag words, categories. There's oodles of hours that go into the back end of what your book is and how you want to present it to the world and in what way and how to price it. And that takes up 80% of the time so far, because I'm still finding my rhythm. It's getting easier. I have an editor who I have loved from the beginning, so I don't have to stress about finding an editor. So that's great. And I have a software that I use for downloading it into the proper formats, and so I don't have to worry about that now. So it will pick up, I think, over time. And I think that's one of the other reasons why I wanted to transition into being an author full time, because it's like, oh, I'm starting to like dial in the system that works for me. And that's nice. And so things will pick up pace with each book. And I like that. I like that as like, this is a lifetime project. And if I'm focusing on this, then I can gather information and experience and grow from that. So I'm not like, this is like a one small part of my life that I'll never really quite figure out in a way that I can give the book its best chance at getting eyeballs on it. So that's the commitment.
And what I've noticed since I published my book is like, when do you tinker with stuff? And when do you just leave it and work on getting more new people to find it? Like, how do you know what's working and how well it's working? And I know you can look at the stats all day long, but you don't know which little piece is actually doing it for you and which little piece is actually getting in your way. So there's lots of experimentation to be done, but the temptation is to keep experimenting and not to just let it do its thing and drive more people towards it. So there's so many question marks in my mind at the moment as to where to focus on, because there's so much you can do with a book. So it's good to hear that that gets easier as you do more and more releases and get that system dialed in. And I know when we worked together, it really felt like really smooth the second time by comparison, even though the book, you weren't sure like about the ending, where you were going to leave it or what was for the next book, because I think there's a relationship between the next few books that you're writing. So it felt like you got that. It was really lovely for me. I don't always have people who are writing more than one book, but it was really lovely for me to have the experience of working with somebody for a second time, which I have with relatively few of my clients, because like often a book is a one-time thing for people, because you knew all the lingo, you knew how it was going to go, and so there wasn't a lot of that explaining that I quite often do with each and every new first-time client. So yeah, it was a good different experience for me as well.
I think it's also one thing to touch on that. I think it's really important when working with other people, especially your editor, is like having a lot of respect for what they're doing, because you're paying a certain amount, and if you give over like a half worked on piece of work, it's going to be hard for them to really get it to the place. You don't want to give them more work than they should be working on.
Yeah, thank you.
And so I really had forethought of that, because maybe you wouldn't have the time to really get it to where you would be able to get it had I put in more effort into my end. You probably would, but maybe other editors wouldn't.
Well, I mean, the way I like to put it is probably the same thing, but like from the other side, which is you're going to get more out of working with me if you are also matching that energy and putting in as much yourself. Like I sometimes encounter a bit of defensiveness with first-time authors who are not used to being edited, because they're very attached to their very precious work, which I completely understand how precious it is. And I very deliberately word my feedback in a suggestive and positive way, and not like, you know, saying things are right or wrong or things that absolutely have to go. It is a collaborative process, and yeah, the people who get the most out of it are the ones who have already put in that reflective work and like contemplated, should this really belong in the book? How attached am I to this definitely being in there, and that kind of thing. So I think the more you self-edit, the more you're open to your editor's edits, and that can be like a really amazing experience. I just had somebody today who I think she's writing about perfectionism, and just expressed how much she has loved the process, which I think she was perhaps perhaps a bit hesitant about, knowing that there are some like perfectionist tendencies in her. I think she was perhaps a little bit nervous about receiving the feedback, but she said, you know, how much she's been learning from the collaborative process. So that's always really, really good to hear. So yeah, I would say to everyone, just approach it with the right open mind, because you'll get the most out of it. And at the end of the day, even though you're the author, the book is not about you. It's about the people who are going to read it. Not that I would say only write with the end reader in mind. There's definitely, it's a balance, but yeah, you have to trust that the readers are going to want to get something out of it that you can't just blurt out, that needs a little bit of processing.
Mm-hmm.
So my cat is being very playful this morning. So the last thing that I really want to move on and speak to is probably going to be easier for you to answer than most people, because I usually say, you know, what would you do differently next time? But you've actually got 2 books to compare, and then again, what would you do next time for your 3rd one? So what was different in the process for you between book 1 and book 2, and what are you going to refine for the future?
Actually, book 1 was easier.
Oh,
because it was just an idea that I had in my head. So it was just really, I felt like my inner being was guiding me through it. And I didn't know what was going to come of it. I really had no idea. The second book, being that it was coming from a memoir, is just a lot trickier, because you're filtering, you're creating a story in a timeline that's probably a little bit different than what happened in my actual life. And then having to, of all the adventures, you know, we have in our lives, and I like, which ones are going to work and which aren't. And so that part of it was actually really hard for me. But the process, I feel like, in terms of what I would change, like in terms of the process, the writing process, I mean, I definitely look forward to getting back to just fiction that isn't like
yeah, super
yeah.
close to the bone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's definitely something that's easier. I think well, I'm fumbling my butt off around this answer, because I'm definitely more aware of writing now. So I'm reading books about writing, the whole showing versus tell. And so I'm contemplating how much of that I did in my first 2 books, and how I can be a better writer moving forward in my next books.
So you're reinvesting in the craft, I guess.
Yeah, I'm just, because now I'm reading more books and trying to read more books in my genre, which I've also been told is a really smart thing to do. Read in your genre, like, how are the endings? How do they write? And you'll just learn a lot about reading other people's authors. And I've read a couple lately, and I'm like, oh, I can see they're doing a lot of telling versus showing, because I can just skip massive parts of it, because I'm like, okay, I get the idea of it. It's being like over described, and then also knowing what the ending is before I start, so that you're working towards an end that you have in mind.
Okay.
So new tactics, I think I want to bring into the picture now that I'm gaining more experience and want to be better at it.
Yeah. Love that. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective and the behind the scenes, especially. It's really exciting to work with somebody who decides that they want to make it their everything and really go for it in that sense. And I can think of a few people I've worked with who certainly I think should go in that direction if they're not already. But it's a really exciting time to be a self-published author, because there's so much that you can do, especially with social media, to get your books read. And especially if you create links between the books and you have a body of work, you can actually direct people to a popular book, and then by this natural phenomenon that exists, people want to read all the books that they love. If they've loved one book by an author, they want to read all their others. And I know that I'm big into devouring like whole series of books by people, or not even series, but I'm into Emily Henry at the moment, and I'm really loving her books. But there's an author called Taylor Jenkins Reid who I've just absolutely devoured on Audible. I listen to her. Like, it's really weird. I sometimes go for just audio or just physical books, depending on the author. But some of them are really great to switch off to. Leanne Moriarty is another one. I read one of hers, and then I just like absolutely have this voracious appetite for anything that she writes. So it's a really smart thing to do, to write multiple books and to build up your body of work, and also to revisit your old books. But I think that a lot of authors get hung up on wanting to change the books that they've already got rather than creating new stuff. And honestly, like, I will still go back to an author's early books, but I rarely find them at book one. I'll find their new exciting book that's out in the shops, and I'll love the author and read them almost sort of backwards. And I'll love the author before I read their early stuff, honestly. So by the time I get to their early stuff, I don't really mind if it's like not as brilliant as the latest one. So what I would say to anybody who's thinking about like writing lots of books in the future is just to move on and get those ideas going. And like you said, Tiff, like, really work on your craft and make the next book the even better one, and the next book the even better one, because people will forgive a lot if they come in at your brilliant book and then they read your back catalogue. So yeah, I'm so excited to see what is next for you, and I know that there's not one but two perhaps coming up.
Oh yeah.
Which is another conversation for another day. But we will definitely, I'll keep everybody posted as to where they can find your books in the future, and I'll link below this video to everything that you have created so that they can find you online and follow you. So thank you so much today for everything that you've talked about. It's really always good to get another perspective on what works, what hasn't worked, and all the options that people have, because it's really important for me to make sure that people know that there's not one right way to do this, and that it's a journey and an adventure. And I really, really loved everything that you had to say today. So thank you.
Thanks for being my editor.
You're welcome. Please keep writing, because I just love your stories.
I will.